Paul Mescal. You play Harry in All of Us Strangers. He's a very mysterious character. So first off, what about that character especially interested you as an actor?
Yeah, I think Harry, especially in that first scene that you meet him, he gives off a kind of air of mystery or a kind of forwardness that is potentially unsettling a bit for Adam. But as the film kind of unravels and as you get to know Harry a bit more, there's something kind of surprising in his uh, kindness and tenderness that he shows towards Adam. So it's that kind of duality that interested me the most, I would say.
When you're playing a character with this much mystery, like we see him mostly through Adam's point of view,
Yeah.
do you create more of kind of more detailed backstory for yourself as an actor to kind of motivate yourself?
Yeah, I think what's so again, what I found incredibly interesting was the kind of detail is actually there in the screenplay. It's quite subtle, and you don't get a lot of insight into his kind of backstory, but it is definitely there. I think it's there in lines when Harry says, "I know what it's like to stop. I know what it's like to stop caring about yourself," or he has that scene with Adam on the bed when he discusses his kind of position at the periphery of his family, and those were kind of my major clues in terms of what his family life was like, how he felt isolated from his family. And for me, that's just it's a heartbreaking kind of center point to him. But again, what I find so warm about him is that he doesn't make that his focus throughout the film. His focus is to provide a safe landing place for Adam to feel comfortable in terms of exploring his sexuality and his relationship with Harry.
And the premise of the film is really interesting. It's this character dealing with this familial love story, trying to
Yeah.
resolve that while also embarking on this new romantic love story. What did you think about that combination?
Yeah, I think it's hopefully what I hope an audience takes from it is that there's kind of two concurrent love stories happening at the same time, one of familial love and one of romantic love, and how different they can seem on paper, but how similar those feelings are. And I think ultimately it will hopefully give an audience a kind of universal access point into it. And yeah, I think fundamentally it's a love story that exists, but both in a familial context and a romantic context.
And you're working with director Andrew Haigh.
Yeah.
What did you think about working with him? Like, had you seen his films before you
Yeah.
got this opportunity?
Yeah, big fan of Andrew Haigh. I think the first film I saw was actually 45 years, and then I saw Lean on Pete, and then I hadn't seen The Weekend until I read the script for All of Us Strangers. And I just think he hasn't really missed in my mind in terms of making great films, and I would include this in that conversation for sure. And in terms of how he is on set, I think Andrew's got this wonderful capacity, I think, for writing these incredibly moving stories. But on set, he's a very practical, there's a kind of practical kindness to him in terms of how he appreciates how difficult it can be to act. And his stories aren't the easiest to inhabit. And he gives you a lot of space and time and care in terms of how he approaches communicating with actors. Yeah.
And he's one of the remarkable things about all of his work is his ability to capture intimacy, both on a
Yeah.
physical level and an emotional level. Which would you say is more challenging as an actor to kind of tap into?
It's a good question. I think both go hand in hand. I think with this film in particular, I don't think there's anything remotely gratuitous about kind of sexual scenes that occur in the film, because what those scenes are doing is that they're furthering these characters' lives. So I think both can be equally challenging to inhabit, but for very different reasons. Like with the physical stuff, you're trying to get at something that feels authentic and true and sexy and that can be difficult when there's lots of people running around, as I'm sure every actor under the sun has ever said for shooting intimate scenes. But then you have scenes like the intimacy that's required to talk about, or from my perspective, when Harry's talking about kind of his familial trauma, there's a kind of intimacy that you have to inhabit and get to the point where those feelings are right on the surface. And that can only really be achieved if you really trust the actors that you're working with and the director, which I did very much. Like working with Andrew Scott and Andrew Haigh on those things is definitely up there in terms of one of the highlights of my career to date.
Pretty much all of your work in the film is with Andrew Scott.
Yeah.
What was it like developing that relationship with him? You know, when your role in the film is so focused on that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I will at some point start running out of words in terms of the admiration that I have for Andrew, but without sounding insincere, it truly was an immense privilege to watch him go to work every day. And as you said, like he carries the film, it's his chair to lift, as to say, but he did it with such grace. He led the cast, and it's a small cast, and sometimes that's an even harder thing to do because he has such an intimate relationship with Jamie, Clare, me, and Andrew, the director. And I think he carried it with such grace. And as a fan of Andrew's work before this, I would hold it as his career best work. And to be across him for some of those scenes was just, I don't know, it's kind of why you want to get out of bed in the morning to act, is to be in that bubble with him. And I'm very, like, incredibly proud of the kind of chemistry or the relationship that we built for those two kind of troubled men. Yeah.
And you know, by the nature of the story, you know, you're not getting to work as much with obviously Jamie Bell and Claire Foy.
Yeah.
You know, did you find yourself wishing that you could, you know, sort of jump in those scenes if you had the chance?
Yeah, I think my first day on set was actually the only day that we crossed over. It was the day, that remarkable scene when Claire and Andrew have that scene in bed when it's that two shot where they're just in profile. And my job that day was to try and not make the bed look like it was shaking when I was trying to sneak into the bed and Jamie was sneaking out. But yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have spent more time with them, but also there was something kind of wonderful about not encountering their work in the film until I saw it. Because from my perspective, me and Andrew shot a film and they shot a film. And then watching how Andrew and Jonathan cut it together was, again, I've never experienced that. Like they went off and shot their section of it in 2 weeks, and then me and Andrew came in for the final 4.5 weeks. So it was a real joy to see what they've done. Like, again, they're extraordinary in the film.
And what did you think of the film, getting to see it all put together with, you know, your story combined with
Yeah,
the other story?
I think it just highlighted the fact that because when you're shooting something, it can be very easy to go into a vacuum with it. Like, you're focused, as you should be as an actor, I think, you're focused on your corner of the film, and that's your responsibility. But me and Andrew saw it for the first time with an audience last week, and I found it was the third time I'd seen it, but it was probably the most moving the film felt to me, because you're feeling it with an audience as well, and you're kind of the blind panic of when you see something for the first time, hoping that it all comes together and that your performance holds up, has kind of dissipated, and now I'm actually able to encounter the film as an audience member, and yeah, I know it sounds boring, but it's just one of those films that I will be proud of for the longest time, I would say.
And you know, you've had generally very good taste in films and filmmakers as you've worked in your career thus far, and you've worked a lot in independent film. What is, you know, does independent film mean something to you in particular that has kept you coming back?
Yeah, like this. Yeah, this is, again, like, I feel like it's the lifeblood of cinema. I think the reason big films exist is because of films like this. I feel like they both, one can't exist without the other, but there is something about the intimacy with which you get to make something small. It feels like uh, filmmaking in its purest sense. I think oftentimes independent cinema, the emotional language can be more challenging. It's also just my taste. It's like what I go to the cinema to see is films like this. And then for filmmakers like Andrew Haigh or Charlotte Wells or people like that to ask you to be in those films that you would go and see in the cinema is, yeah, it's very kind of a pinch yourself moment.
Speaking of pinch yourself moments, you received an Oscar nomination for After Sun.
Yeah.
You know, did you feel like that's changed a lot, like in the months since then, for you in your career?
Yes and no. It's just like I've been left with lots of pinch marks, I would say. But it's it it's a weird thing. Like obviously at the time of the Oscars, it's this weird carnival of meetings and engaging with people that you've seen on screen for years and years and years. But then that all kind of thankfully quietens down, and you go back to work and you encounter the same difficulties on set as you would pre-Oscar nomination. And there's something very settling about that, because I think that whole experience, whilst it's incredibly intoxicating, it's important to remember that that's not real life. And also, so there's that kind of thing that we're like starting out now. It's like you spend so much time talking about the work that then I remember going back onto set, having done that whole circuit and being like, God, I better back up all the stuff I've been saying about why I love acting or what I think is good acting. And so yeah, there's kind of two parts to that. It's both an incredibly exciting thing and also a relief to get back to the thing that the making of it, I suppose.
And you know, in addition to the nomination, you're now a member of the Academy. So,
Yeah.
what do you look for in films that especially moves you and captures your attention?
Yeah, I think it's something that like that's a good question. I think it's something that I have an access point into, and that doesn't mean that it has to be necessarily like hyper naturalistic, but it is something that I gravitate towards. It's something that feels rooted in human condition. I just love actors. I love watching actors and seeing what they do. I love coming out of watching a film, like with this, for example, watching Andrew for the first time in this film and coming out and being terrified in a good way, of being like, I don't know how they do it, mixed with a healthy amount of jealousy and fear. I think that like that's the ideal exit point coming out of a theater, when an actor surprises you and terrifies you with their talent.
I want to congratulate you on All of Us Strangers, and thank you so much for talking with me about it. It's
Oh,
been a pleasure.
thanks very much.